Hi, my name is Jesse Mallory, and I'm the State Director for Americans for Prosperity Colorado, joined today by Jocelyn Castillo, our Legislative Liaison for Americans for Prosperity. And we're here today to talk about our effort to end Washington waste and highlight the spending spree that's happening there. And part of that is we're working with congressional leaders who are on the front lines of this battle. And our special guest today is Congressman Doug Lamborn from Colorado's 5th Congressional District. Sir, thank you for joining us today.
Hey, it's great to be with you both, and I appreciate the efforts you and Americans for Prosperity do to try to bring sanity back to our nation's budget and spending.
Well, thank you. And Congressman Lamborn was elected in 2006 and serves as a high-ranking member on the Armed Services Committee, Natural Resources, among others. But one of the things I like to highlight is before that, he actually served in Colorado's legislature and was part of the coalition that helped pass the largest tax cut in Colorado history. So thank you, sir, for that.
You're welcome.
As a taxpayer advocate, what is it like to see Washington spend trillions of dollars this last week? And can you explain what happened and what that means for taxpayers?
Well, it's real distressing. We are selling our future down the river and burdening our children and grandchildren with horrendous and humongous debt that's going to take years and decades to pay off, if it ever gets paid off. And of course, as you know, if it doesn't get paid off, there's an interest component that we have to pay every year. And that is going to crowd out all kinds of other spending that we might need to do in the future, but will become impossible to do.
Yeah, and Jocelyn, this budget resolution has several pieces to it. And what a lot of people may not know is it actually impacts healthcare. Can you walk us through that?
Absolutely. And thank you, Congressman, for being with us and really bringing information about what can be a rather obscure process in Congress, you know, and the headlines, we see that this is an infrastructure bill, that it's going to be an investment in our future. But we know that this is not a normal process, and, you know, 4.5+ trillion in spending that is barely infrastructure. People need to know what's in it. And so one of the things that we're concerned about on top of the top lines, how much money is going to be spent, the concerns that will come with inflation, it's some of the components that would be in there, and particularly in the healthcare space, it really would be nothing short of, you know, getting us closer to a government takeover of healthcare. And that's just plain and simple, looking to expand Medicare benefits, looking to reduce the number of therapeutics and life-saving treatments that are available for our seniors by imposing price controls, as well as expanding subsidies for insurance companies, all paid for by tax hikes. And so, you know, this is very concerning to us. This is just one of the many provisions on here dubbed so-called human infrastructure. It is just more spending, more government control of our everyday healthcare and life through programs. And Congressman, could you give us a sense for what else is in this budget resolution, which is, you know, it's closely tied to the infrastructure bipartisan bill that many are talking about, but there's also a separate budget reconciliation partisan package that contains many harmful provisions. Can you give us a sense for what's in there and what concerns you most?
And you're right, there are two different components that they combined into one rule. It's the $1.1 trillion infrastructure and transportation bill, and then about a $3.5 trillion wish list of all kinds of liberal items that they've wanted for years and years that they want to tack onto that at almost the same time. And both of these will be considered in the next month or two, assuming that that second larger component can pass the Senate, which isn't yet a given. But these things, unfortunately, will be passing the House. The moderates, so-called moderates in the House, put up a little bit of a fight, but they caved in, and not a single one of them voted against this, even though they didn't get the concessions that they were calling for. They got a vague promise that sometime over a month from now, the transportation bill will be considered. They thought that should come first. The progressives thought that the welfare and social spending bill of $3.5 trillion being written by Bernie Sanders would come first. So whichever order it comes in, both of these are larded with all kinds of pork and excess spending and government control, like you just said. For instance, in the transportation bill, it abrogates right to work. A number of states have had right to work in their passed by citizens initiatives or passed into law. And for the federal projects that this contemplates, that's being thrown away. That's just an example of the lack of freedom and the imposition on our liberty and freedom that the Democrats feel very comfortable with imposing. People should be free. For instance, if they don't want to join a union, that shouldn't prevent them from even having a job. It should be personal choice and freedom. And that's what the law in these various states, about half the states in the country, says should be preserved, but they're throwing that out the window. That's just one of many, many examples. Only about 10% of the transportation package is actually roads and bridges. A lot of it is for Green New Deal. There's $60 billion for Amtrak, which is a lot more than its annual budget. There's so much of this excess spending that people won't know how to spend it. And I'm just really distressed about the debt burden that it imposes. They say that it's paid for with higher fees and taxes, and yet the CBO has come out and said, no, there's at least $250 billion of this that is not paid for, and more if you look closely at the smoke and mirrors. So it adds to our national debt as well. There's just so much about this that's going to hurt our economy, and I'm really distressed about it.
Congressman, what concerns you most about all the spending that you're seeing in Washington? I mean, you've been down there for some time now, and is it getting better? Is it getting worse? What's your analysis?
Well, even under Republicans, we were spending too much. Donald Trump had a lot of good plans, especially restoring the military, but he wasn't willing to tackle the social spending side of things. He's promised that he would have done that in a second term, but that never materialized as we saw, at least not so far. So what bothers me, and then even when Republicans controlled everything, we didn't have the Senate because the filibuster rule let the Democrats have veto power over anything going through the Senate. So we really, in name only, had control, but not in any practical sense. So Republican policies, good ones, would pass the House but die in the Senate. And my concern is that we've taken that on steroids now. We have a Democratic Party that thinks that money grows on trees. There's no accountability for the future. They don't see anything past the next election. And they're only doing spending that they think will buy them votes in the next election so they can stay in power for the next term of Congress after that. And that's as far as they think. That's not statesmanship. That's the opposite of statesmanship. And the national debt and interest on the debt, you know, we're going from $600 billion a year to $1 trillion a year soon in interest on the national debt. That's going to crowd out private sector investment. It's going to crowd out what the government can spend money on legitimately on the needs that it has to do and meet under the Constitution, and will be hard pressed to do that. And if we go too far down this road, other countries won't even be willing to loan money to buy our bonds to help finance this debt. They're going to, at some point, get cold feet, and then we'll really be in trouble as a nation. So this overall spending, and you just have to look at Joe Biden's remarks to know that he doesn't understand what he's doing. He's either mentally incompetent or he's just so stubborn he can't face the facts. But he says when it comes to inflation that more spending will prevent inflation. Well, it's the exact opposite. The traditional view of inflation is too much money chasing too few goods and services. So throwing more money at the problem does not help inflation, it makes it worse. And we're starting to see this, you know, gas at the pump and everything else. And the president also is willing to get jobs overseas, like the Russian Nord Stream 2 pipeline, natural gas out of Russia that destabilizes Europe and shuts down a pipeline between us and Canada that would be North American and US jobs. So he doesn't even really care about good paying jobs for Americans. And he thinks money grows on trees. He is the worst thinker in terms of what works in politics and what's good for our country. anyone I've ever seen. He's way worse than Barack Obama, way worse than Jimmy Carter. And it's really sad to see what he's doing to try to destroy our country.
So I want to dig in a little bit with Colorado being, an energy-rich state, and we've seen a lot of these packages and these proposals. There seems to be, I was reading about, let's see, it was massive energy taxes, California-style mandates, and even elements of the Green New Deal. What are you seeing crawling around the halls of Washington when it comes to those sort of policies?
Well, if you call something green, you're going to get all the Democrats to vote for it. And right now they have a very thin majority and a tie in the House and a tie in the Senate, so they'll pass it if they can. I really think that we need to, be careful about the environment, protect it wherever possible, reduce emissions where you can, but not cripple our economy, not throw Americans out of work. We have years and years and decades to adjust to any rising carbon dioxide that the environmentalists are raising an alarm about. It's not going to, the world is not going to end in 9 years. That was one recent prediction of ours. When the Green New Deal was introduced, they said it had 12 years and that was it. And that was 3 years ago. Okay, so we're down to 9 years left in our society. Well, I don't buy that for a second. But that kind of alarmism is what they trot out, and the press goes along with it to justify any kind of spending. Like in the transportation bill, if I'm not mistaken, they want to buy 500,000 electrical charging stations around the country for this 1 or 2% of Americans who currently drive electric vehicles. That's the kind of trying to not just nudge, but push the economy in a direction that they think is good for the future when it comes to the environment. And yet they're only going by a worst case scenario based on alarmism. And that's really not how you should make bipartisan or measured or practical or reasoned out policy.
No, I agree. And I know we've covered a lot of the bad that's happened in the last couple of weeks. What are you optimistic about going forward?
Well, one thing I'm optimistic about is that the Americans are seeing that the Biden administration and the Democrat-controlled Congress is making some horrendous and destructive decisions for the future of our country. Look at Afghanistan. We haven't even talked about the horrific tragedies that are taking place there and the bloodbath that's becoming. The Biden administration is doing such bad policy that there is no doubt in my mind that the US House will flip in the next election, a year from November. Then we can stop the Biden administration in its tracks. But the question is, how much damage can they do in the meantime?
Understood. Well, I appreciate your time. And as Americans for Prosperity, we've been actively working to raise awareness about the Washington waste and all the spending going on there. Our activists have sent in over 1.5 million letters to Washington. We've had countless congressional meetings, hundreds of events across the nation. And if you want to get involved and help us and make your voice heard, visit stopthespendingspree.com. And Congressman, do you have any final words for us today?
Hey, I want AFP to keep up the great work that you're doing. We're fighting in Congress. I know we're ultimately going to prevail, but we just have to press with every ounce of our beings, every ounce of our fiber and strength that we've got. And I know you're doing that.
That's right. That's right. So, Congressman, thank you for your time. More importantly, thank you for your leadership. Again, if you want to get involved, it's stopthespendingspree.com. Thanks for joining us today.